Okay, take car, go to Mum's, kill Phil. Sorry, Phil. Grab Liz, go to the Winchester, have a nice cold pint, and wait for this all to blow over. How's that for a slice of fried gold? I'm Eddie Webb.
Oh.
And today we're going to talk about Shaun of the Dead here on Genreless. Hello and welcome to our first proper Cornetto review, as it were.
But you can't have a first one without a pre-show, Eddie, and that's why space was so important.
Right. And actually, I'm glad we did do Spaced because it helped me to appreciate this on a couple different levels. One, seeing a lot of the same actors over again. Definitely, I was like, okay, now I get kind of what's happening here is that these people like working together and wanting to work together again on a new project, which I think is part of the energy of this film, right? Even though it was a big film, it still kind of has the feel of like kind of an indie film.
Is that all right, as an American that watches a lot of British television and a lot of like BBC mystery stuff on PBS and random other places, I've noticed that there is a certain set of about 30 actors and actresses per pay band that are in every single show. Now, is it because these people are friends, or is it because their pay band is like way down here right now? And as it goes up, they work with each other less and less as they get in different pay bands.
I have joked that watching British television is basically watching the same 12 people all the time. But I have since learned, I think part of the reason for that is England still has a strong tradition of what is called repertory theater, where a small group of actors do on a wide variety of shows where they're all playing different roles depending on what they're putting on at the moment. And people will often even change roles during the course of a production. And that's just normalized. It's just, of course, this person has a different hat on, so now we just understand they're a different character. So I think that is part of it. But also, you're absolutely right. I think some of it is until recently, British television pretty much had a relatively shallow pool. But again, because it's a small group, they do all know each other, and so therefore it's gonna be natural to like, okay, I met this guy at a party, and we also work together on other things, so I'm gonna think about them when I'm hiring this other person. But then over the years, you're right. Like some people have floated in pay bands. I mean, the most iconic example is David Tennant, who I can listen to Big Finish audios where he was playing a cameo as a Nazi general, and just doing ad lib voices. And now, obviously, he's one of the most highest paid actors in the world. So, I mean, there's definitely floating that happens, right?
So when you bump into David on the street,
right.
just let him know anytime he wants to come onto the podcast to talk about his Big Finish work, he is welcome to. I promise not to do like David Tennant accents or anything, but I will fanboy about his time in Doctor Who pre the TV show and then after.
Yes. Hilariously, we have to talk about, I don't care. The first time I actually heard him was when he did an audio version of Arkwright something, but it was basically an audio version of a relatively obscure British comic. He did like the first volume of that in like the early 2000s. Like it was before he got hired for Doctor Who. And then like 20 years later, they did the second volume. and so it's this moment like it had the original version like David Tennant, it had Haley Atwell. I mean, it was just like people who are now huge names before they were big. And then, now they're trying to get that cast back together for the second volume. They finally managed to do it. It's just hilarious. But like, again, like Simon Pegg, we talked about this before.
Wait,
he's done some
before you move on.
He's done, yeah.
You mentioned name. Now I definitely have to come to a full stop to go to Chris's Crush Corner and talk
Well,
about the amazing Haley Atwell. And
yes.
that's it. I'll just name drop. Although if you ask my wife, she'll say that I have a man crush on David Tennant. So Chris's Crush Corner just got a 2-for-1 special for all of you listeners. Please go ahead, Eddie.
But no, I mean, I was gonna say, like, there is a lot of overlap, and certainly as I've lived here, I'm seeing more and more that there is overlap just in form, right? Like, it's not as unusual to have someone like Simon Pegg, who is an actor and a scriptwriter and a voice actor and an author and a comic book writer and so on, so on, so on. So that's, I won't say common, but pretty fair. Like one of there's a comedian here who does also uh, a very well respected series of murder mystery novels. And so you have weird moments of like people who are known as actors, then write successful other books, and then are the producers on shows where they then cameo in. So get this weird Ouroboros of artistic talent.
Are you talking about the fantastic Sharon Horgan, who in an interview talks about that she was never pretty enough to be cast in lead roles, so she started writing the roles herself so she could cast herself?
I didn't know about that, but that makes total sense.
Love it. I forgot what it's called now, but there's a 3-season comedy with Sharon Horgan and Rob Delaney on Amazon Prime that is great. It's like one title
Oh
too. It's
wow!
like Crashing or something. No, sorry, Crashing is a Phoebe Waller bridge show. I forgot what it's called, but if I remember, I'll mention it. It's funny, good show. American comes there, and shenanigans ensue.
Right, right. But anyway, so the other reason why I'm glad we watched Space is that you pointed out to me after we did the Space episode that there was an episode we skipped
Purposely,
in the first season.
we skipped it on purpose because it was sort of the bedrock that let Wright and Peg know they wanted to make a zombie movie.
Right. And it's funny because, like, if we had watched that, I think I would have hit my pivot moment of these people really get geek culture faster because that entire episode hinges on understanding that Resident Evil exists and is a thing. And so, yeah, I mean, it's basically the usual kind of sitcom shenanigans, but then done through the lens of Simon Pegg's character reinterpreting everything as a zombie apocalypse. So, yeah, there's a very natural segue into a Shaun of the Dead because they had actors in zombie makeup. They alluded to zombie tropes, although they didn't go to it nearly as deep as they're going to do in this movie. And again, it was what Space does really well, which is let's take icons and imagery from geek culture and juxtapose it with personal relationship sitcom conflicts and put that onto the screen.
For anyone that's curious, we're talking about Space season 1, episode 3 called Art. Um, Sean, look at that. Peg and
Yeah,
Frost's character get bad speed, and so they envision for Sean, who's playing Resident Evil 2, a zombie apocalypse happening throughout the course of the show. The rest of the episode is about Brian, because it's called Art, is about Brian's feelings that his art is inadequate versus his former partner, who is more successful, maybe? Wink,
right.
wink.
Uh,
And the best part
it,
of the
it,
entire
it does
episode,
contain.
other than zombie stuff, is the rabbit bit. You're saying?
I was like, I will say, um, there are a couple of instances of a transphobic slur that are said. That
Yep.
said, it does actually present a relatively solid non-binary character in there. So it's definitely that kind of muddy area of they're reaching towards relatively progressive thought, but they were stuck with outdated language. So I think it's pretty firmly the of the times valid defense as opposed to the of the times no everyone was still an asshole back then too defense.
And somewhat to their credit, in an interview for the 25th anniversary of Space, I want to say that Hines and Peg both apologized about
Mhm.
the language they use from their perspective at the time for what they knew.
Oh, cool! That's really awesome. That doesn't surprise me, but that is awesome. And also has one of my favorite visual gags actually, where they're talking about having taken bad speed, and she asks Tim, "Hey, where's your friend?" He's like, "Where's Mike?" It's like, "I don't know." And then we smash cut to Nick Frost running around just like a maniac and then falling over. And then that's pretty much it. It's like that's like pretty much all you see from the episode, more or less. It's just a great just visual beat.
Because I figured if we'd watched that, it wouldn't have been as much fun watching that before watching Shaun of the Dead.
Right.
Or there needed to have been some sort of space, but still a linkage between the two.
Yeah. So we didn't mention it last time, but if you haven't watched Shaun of the Dead yet, you can pause, go watch the episode. It's a neat little kind of a prelude again, a specific prelude to segue into this. But you're right. I think if we talked about that, our conversation would have been so shadowed by Shaun of the Dead coming, where we wouldn't be able to talk about space proper. So I think it was good to omit it, but it is neat to watch it before this.
Do you know how I figured out how to do that?
How did you figure out how to do that?
Jazz hands and just going with my gut, Eddie. Not taking 26 pages of notes like what Eddie has right now.
I do not have 26.
Just winging it.
I will remove your note privileges if you keep this shit up. Okay, so the Cornettos, right? It's called the Cornetto Trilogy. We talked about how even though I don't think they show up in Spaced, they do show up throughout the 3 movies of the trilogy, and apparently it started because Edgar Wright wants Ada Cornetto to get over a hangover. So we thought it'd be funny if that happened in the movie, and that's pretty much it. That's all the thought that went into it.
And then after Shaun came out, someone asked him about a sequel or like how they would link together, and as a random joke, he made it about them being a Cornetto trilogy. And so that's how it kind of all links together. So in each one of the movies, there's a different flavor Cornetto they use to represent the movie.
Right. And I think that's again kind of indication of clearly was not planned. It was they did space for the moment in time. And they said it would be cool to do a movie. They did a movie, and that did success. Like I mentioned before, it has kind of the vibe of an indie film. It only took £4 million to make, and it made £30 million worldwide. So it was way over expectations on profits. And so it's like, well, we have to make another film now, but there was no clue they were going to make another film after this one.
Thinking about when this was made, like 2004, it's a zombie film. How much money were zombie films really pulling in back then? Not like now, but then.
I'm trying to think. It would have been. I think. I'm curious if 28 Days Later came out before or after this, because that was another British zombie film, right?
Technically, Eddie. Technically. Right. Brushing up my glasses. 28 Days Later was not a zombie film, Eddie. They were not, in fact, dead. They were merely infected and lost some of their cognitive reasoning and became more aggressive in their nature.
Well, actually, you are correct. Yet at the same time, it 100% uses all the zombie film tropes. So it is from a classification standpoint a zombie film. I think you will find.
Oh, God.
Good day, sir.
So 28 Days Later, if you like the zombie genre, is a great movie. But I will never forget one scene that pissed me off more than anything in the entire world the first time I watched it, in the theater no less. I almost got up and walked out of the movie. They were going along, and this isn't going to spoil anything, but a single drop of water fell, not rain, a drop of water from like something fell and hit one of the people directly in the eye. And infected them. That's it. In the eye. Random. Like.
Right. Was it Christopher Eccleston in 28 Days Later? I think I recall that.
I want to say yes, towards the end.
I think it was like a random military guy.
Yeah. He not random. He was the commander.
Oh, commander, right. That was it.
Because Christopher Eccleston is never a random actor. He is like what is it? Deathstroke for Cobra Commander. He's a sidekick. That's a villain.
He's amazing. He's an amazing actor. Speaking of the shallow acting pool of British cinema at the time, Simon Pegg apparently was actually up for a role in Dog Soldiers, which is being filmed around this time, which is a werewolf film as opposed to a zombie film, and he turned it down so he could do this movie instead.
I've never even seen or heard of that movie. Now that you've
never seen Dog Soldiers? Oh
I've
my
never seen
god.
Dog Soldiers. All
Oh,
right, Eddie, go ahead. You're going to talk about Dog Soldiers, so let's hear it.
no, I was just gonna say, like, it is, basically a Predator, but with a werewolf, or Aliens with a
Cool.
werewolf, it's a bunch of military guys in over their heads, stuck in a place, and a werewolf is killing them. But there's the added thing of which one of us is the werewolf, right?
Okay. So it's
Um,
whoever someone wants that movie then thought, huh, I can make a game called Are You a Werewolf and be successful with it. Oh, look at that.
maybe,
Movies,
you never know.
we always say movies and TV influence everything. So if you're playing
Sure.
Are You a Werewolf, no, it came from that movie that I've never seen that Eddie just talked about. Regardless of the fact, I think Are You a Werewolf? It happens in a little village, not a military base. Still,
Right.
essence.
Actually, Dog Soldiers, I think, takes place in someone's house. So, I mean,
Mm.
it is definitely, a lower budget film. Clearly did not do nearly as well as, Shaun of the Dead did. But again, there was this kind of vein of slightly self-aware British horror that was happening in the early 2000s, which is fascinating.
Well, of course, Peg would rather do this. Eddie, if we were co-writing something together and then I got offered a job to go do something else and then our thing that we're doing together got accepted, do you think I would not weasel my way out of whatever the other thing was to come back and do our dream thing?
Sure, absolutely. And I think that plays to Shaun of the Dead's strengths is, right, like, we've said before that the space is kind of a lead into this, but I mean, the easy chemistry of the fact that these people have all worked together really does show on the screen. And I think I could see why that would be more attractive than me being thrown into a production where I don't really know anybody. Maybe it pays slightly more, although I doubt it. Um, so I'm trying to see him like, hey, I'll turn this down so I can work with my friends over here on this cool thing that we're making. It makes total sense.
My question for you, if you know, why is Jessica Hines' role in this movie so small?
I don't know. Um, I do appreciate the joke that comes with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. The one thing I could think of is I think they're trying to just change things up a bit because if you think about it, in retrospect, we see Nick Frost and Simon Pegg so much as a pair now, but that wasn't necessarily a given when Shaun of the Dead comes around, right? Because if you look at Spaced, Frost is kind of the wacky sidekick that is shows up occasionally. There's some episodes where he's not even in it. So it may have been they were just trying to shuffle around who does what plot role to kind of liven things up. And then people really liked watching Nick Frost and Simon Pegg together, and so they kind of got lumped together as a duo from that point forward.
Hmm.
That's my guess. That's my assumption.
I will go back to a question I had before. Since you brought it up, we mentioned werewolves, we mentioned some other stuff. What is your favorite, and I capital F, favorite monster movie type? Like, is it zombies? Is it werewolves? Is it vampires? Is it Frankenstein's? Like, what is it?
Uh, I mean, if I'm being honest, it's actually luchadors fighting monsters.
For
Because the
for that
El Santo movies are amazing.
for that
And by
very
amazing, I mean
small
terrible.
subgenre, that very small subgenre of fan that we have listening, can you give them a recommendation? Because I've never heard of that.
You've never heard of these movies? Okay, so really quickly, um oh god, it's gonna be hard to do this quickly. El Santo was a wrestler who became a famous movie star, and a lot of the movies that were made in Mexico. And they were basically, what if we took other genres of movies and shoved the professional wrestler as lead actor in it? For a while, he was in spy movies, he was in detective movies, whatnot. But eventually, his most popular ones became movies where he would fight monsters. And El Santo was in like 50 of these. There's like a ton of these movies. Um, the one that most people in America probably are aware of is relatively recently, Mystery Science Theater did one where El Santo fights Dracula by going through a time machine that he invented to go back into the Victorian age to fight Dracula to find his treasure. So it was El Santo and the Treasure of Dracula.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah,
All right.
they're bonkers. They're bonkers.
We may put that on our list now of stuff to review. That is a great but inappropriate answer for our question because they're not. That's not a monster classification movie. That's
Damn
an El
it.
Santo classification movie, which is like a subgenre of a subgenre of the monster. So I'm asking for the monster. Like that is a reoccurring monster type in these films.
uh, honestly, it's a cliche given my career, but honestly, I think of those, I tend to gravitate to vampire films most often.
Why is that?
Uh, because I think the fact that it is a sapient monster in a lot of ways means that there's always the conflict of can I reason with this person and some movies that is I can, other movies that I can't, and plus the fact that it plays with our discomfort with the dead and the uncanniness of people that we've seen dead moving around. Zombies are a bit more kind of full stream on that front. It's like, what if everyone you knew came back from the dead? But this is a little more intimate and personal. I think they tend to be a bit more character driven, which I tend to like more.
Yeah.
But that said, I tend to, I mean, really, when I'm watching monster films, it's does this specific film speak to me rather than which kind of monster it is. But I just, if I go through a list of all the ones I like, most vampires appear in a lot of them.
But asking for the genre is easier than saying, "Tell me the top 10 monster movies, Eddie." Then
Right,
we'll go and
right,
correlate
right.
them into something. So
Right. It's the Lost Boys, and afterwards it falls apart. I don't remember. I can't tell you that. How about you? Do you have a preference of what monster type you like to watch?
I am actually, this will probably shock our listeners, not a huge monster movie fan. So if I had to choose, I would say Aliens.
Okay, that's actually fair.
But if you wanted something more terrestrial, I won't even make a mythos joke. But I would probably say Vampires 2 because I like the fact much of the thing overlaps with you, which is also
Mm.
why I generally do not like zombie films at all. That's not my thing.
Yes.
And
Go ahead.
so I want to say that and part of that also goes for werewolf films because there's so many different depictions of werewolves
Oh
from
yeah.
them almost being similar to zombies in that model that if they bite someone, then that person's going to go and become a werewolf if they live. So you still get the whole infection thing overwhelming everyone else and like an inability to communicate or try to barter with them versus like fully controlled werewolves that can do their own thing and they just have superpowers.
Right. Yeah. Uh, I was gonna say something and I forgot. Doesn't matter. All right. That's where I'm at right now. Oh, I remember now. I'm with you in that I generally don't groove on zombie films as a whole. Um, uh, for a while, I like most of the world was watching The Walking Dead, and then after I think we talked before, after a couple seasons, I just got off the train because it became same story over and over and over again, as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
Um, and I have watched individual zombie films, but generally I tend to gravitate towards the ones like Shaun of the Dead that actually spoof or do something with the tropes rather than something that unabashedly presents the tropes.
And one of the reasons why I think Shaun of the Dead works so well, and it's something that I've said before, is they have a love of the genre and media they're engaging with before they go and try to make jokes and riff on it. So you can tell that they're riffing with it and making some fun of it, but there's a love that goes through it. The exact opposite of if you go and watch She-Hulk, where they look how I brought all that around just for that She-Hulk joke. And I know people are going to say in retrospect, I went to watch She-Hulk. It's not bad. I totally still disagree. Because they didn't enjoy the thing. And Shaun of the Dead loves this thing. And in fact, for all the movies they do for the trilogy, it is stuff they love and they have an intimate knowledge of, so they can make fun of it and still make it engaging for fans and for new people.
Yeah, and that's something because as I was watching this, like in my head, I just like, oh, it's a parody of zombie films. And I started watching it, and it's not entirely true, right? Um, because Scream, the Scream, not Scream, yeah, I think it's Scream, the Scream franchise, whatever. There's a franchise of movies that make fun of horror films specifically. It's not Scream. It's
Their
one that uses the same
Scream,
mask.
their scary movie.
Scary movie. That's what I'm thinking of actually. Um, but this is something different. It's a bit more, what if we took a movie concept or genre seriously and then shoved it into a British situation and show how it's a bit rubbish as a result? How American movie franchises don't quite work when you put it up against British culture. And I think it's kind of what they're actually shooting for with this
Hmm.
movie.
I don't know. I am not intimately familiar enough with British culture to agree or disagree, but I would say this is probably the first zom-com, if you will.
Yes, right. Yeah, and that is actually a relatively noteworthy genre. I mean, like, there's been quite a few since then. I know iZombie comes to mind right away. There was, a few
Surprisingly
different
good TV
movies.
show.
Yeah, iZombie's actually pretty good.
I had low
Um,
expectations, but then it hooked me because it could because of the cast. Um, the zombiness of the show, though, was very all over the map.
right. Santa Clara Diet also comes to mind, which is
Haven't seen
is
it.
it's genuinely funny, but also it is a weird show that is funny and manages to make pretty intense gore also really funny.
Hmm.
So it's a bizarre show. I, again, had no idea what it was when I started watching it. Started watching it, and I was just like, "Oh, this show's just deeply weird."
My general actual dislike of zombie stuff is why I haven't watched it, even though I think it has my dude in it, Raylan Givens. Um, yeah, Timothy Oliphant, who I watch in everything, regardless of how good or bad it is.
It's actually pretty funny, and the zombiness is not as prevalent as many other zombie films.
Hmm. Now we're just going on a deep dive into zombie stuff. Do you want to shift back to Shaun of the Dead because we could keep going in the other direction?
Yeah, I mean, did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about in regards to the film as a whole before we dive into the summary?
I think it was fascinating that they pulled together a lot of space fans to come in. I think they paid them a pound or something for their time to be the
Yes.
zombies in the background,
Mhm.
just because they love the stuff they do so much that people came in droves to just be part of it.
Yeah. There's definitely there was definitely a community that was together before this movie, and obviously people really loved Shaun of the Dead, and therefore after it. Um, for example, when I was living in Ireland in 2017, there was a pretty big storm that hit the southern part of the Republic of Ireland, and it was very much the stay inside, lock your door, power's going out, the waters are rising level of storm. And so my wife and I, oh, okay, well, you know, got in, made sure our stuff was closed up, and we were never really seriously affected, but we couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And Irish Twitter was just full of people doing Shaun of the Dead memes. Like, oh, let's go to the pub, and like, because one of the things was like people genuinely going to the pub to try to ride the storm out, and Irish government was like, "No, stay home." And pub owners are like, "Please don't come here because we don't have power." And people were still doing it because of and making Shaun of the Dead jokes. And it's like just Ireland in a nutshell.
Now you brought up a bad memory almost because my family and I went to Asheville this summer, and Asheville was incredible.
Mhm,
And this is before the flood basically happened. And there was this great bar there, like brewery and everything else. It was fantastic.
mhm,
Um, Greenleaf Brewing, I think is what it's called. So if you're ever in Nashville now, like they're back on and they're back working, but they didn't have power for weeks, and they were making posts and stuff about the progress of the bar and how they're getting like all the water out and everything else.
mhm.
And so it was. I'm glad they're back. Reading their posts were depressing yet fascinating about how they're overcoming the obstacles of the flood as it happened because people got trapped, and now there are parts of Asheville that are gone forever after that happened.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it is definitely tragic, but certainly when people are trying to use media as a way to kind of joke about rough
Yeah,
situations, the fact that movies like Shaun of the Dead so often come up shows that it hits that perfect balance of it is genuinely a horror film, right? Like in no, if you look at it, if you just read the synopsis, like we're gonna do, almost all of the jokes are gone from it. We just talk about the plot. All the jokes are in how it's presented, but it is straight up a horror film. So that kind of balance of we're not making fun of the genre. We are showing how these kinds of characters, when they are confronted with these genres, don't quite map to expectations. And that's why I find fascinating and enjoyable about this film in particular.
Absolutely. I'm ready if you are.
Okay,
Or
cool.
I would happily just sit here and talk about the three of them in more detail.
Almost like we have that planned. Spoilers for what we're going to talk about soon. Anyway, so uh, we start in the Crouch End area of North London, where 29-year-old electronic salesman Sean, shockingly enough, is disrespected by his colleagues, does not get along with his stepfather Philip, and is dumped by his girlfriend Liz after he promises to improve himself, but is unsuccessful in making decent plans for an anniversary date. At his favorite pub, the Winchester, a heartbroken Sean gets drunk with his slacker best friend Ed. At home, Sean and Ed's roommate Pete complains of a bite wound from a mugger and berates Sean, telling him to stop leaning on Ed and get his life together. So that's kind of the first chunk of the film where we're just establishing everything before the zombiness kicks in. And one of the things that I didn't see in Spaced, but definitely becomes a standard of at least the two Cornetto films that I have seen, is recycling lines and recycling actual entire shots to set a kind of before and after. Here's what's life before the movie tropes come in. Here's what's life like after the movie tropes come in. And one of my favorites in Shaun of the Dead is there's this long tracking shot where Sean walks out of his house, turns the corner, goes across the streets, um, walks down a couple of doors, and then goes into the shop to get something, buy something from the shop, and then the camera pulls back out. It's a really long tracking shot, and it's mechanically complicated because there's curbs and there's cars, and it's actually from a cinematography standpoint a genuinely interesting shot. But uh, it parallels the shot we see later, and even how Simon Pegg is walking and the motions he makes are identical in both shots. He trips at one point in the exact same spot in both shots. He yawns in the exact same spot in both shots. And so it's wonderful how this movie plays with parallelisms. I'll say something that's very obviously going to play off later. But as opposed to most movies, we have one or two of those. It is loaded with these. It's just constant. And so this whole chunk is just stuff that we're going to see a different riff on later in the film.
So that long shot that you're talking about, the what was it like? The executives actually wanted them to cut that shot completely because they thought it was a waste of time, and Wright didn't want to cut it, so that's why they had Peg trip how he did again to like reinforce its importance. So they couldn't cut it because they had something going on in the scene. Because originally it was sort
Huh.
of like him walking. So
Right.
that was creatives trying to work around executive mandates.
Huh. Love it. Oh, that's great. Because certainly it is the trip that that makes you, at least made me realize when we're watching is, oh, this is meant to be an exactly identical shot.
Yeah. And stepping back to the beginning of the film, though, the even the opening credits as they're going through are fascinating and fun to watch, and they're showing you that it's going to be a zombie beat. Just because even as they're panning through and you see the extras are dancing almost, but they're in unison, almost in like sort of a zombie formation from how the lighting is
Right.
shot and everything else. So that's leading into a zombie film you're about to watch before it does the hard cut with like the roommate drama between the three of them.
Right. And then that leads to something else that I like about the movie is that even though this is the setup of the quote unquote normal relationships, the normal status quo, uh, there's all of this stuff happening in the background. Like there are news reports get cut off at convenient moments. At one point in time, they're talking outside of the place where Sean works, and an army truck just drives by, and it's done in a way that the audience, because they're going to see a movie about zombies, are pretty quickly seeing these things, but they're done in such a way that the characters can believably ignore this stuff. But it also establishes these characters as being in their own world. It's like there's all stuff going on, and they just don't care because they're so focused on their what initially appears to be extremely petty personal dramas, but end up turning out to be the entire heart of the film.
Yeah. But as we're not there yet, I still kind of want to focus on the relationship because a
Sure.
lot of it goes to their third roommate being a dick, is like Ed sort of put on the back of his shirt. But I'm not gonna lie
Mhm.
to you. If I'm in my like late 20s and I've got a job where I'm in a suit and I'm driving to work and I'm living with two slackers who can't take messages, who can't do anything productive or helpful for at least 3 years now, he's not a dick. Like,
Right.
he's past the point of being rational to address them and associate with them to like utter frustration.
Yeah. No,
Kind of,
it is classic. When I first saw this movie, I was like, "Yeah, Pete's a dick," and now I'm watching it again as a nearly 50-year-old man. It's like, no, Pete is completely right.
he just wants you to do your part of the housework. Like, it's not an unreasonable request. So, but in my 20s, I was like, man, that guy's a fucking asshole. Fuck him. I can have my shit everywhere and make it a rat infested fly pen if I want to.
Right. Similarly, Liz is absolutely correct to be mad at Sean, right?
Yeah.
Because Sean does, you know, I mean, she's like, I want something more than just going to the pub every night, which is not an unreasonable request. And so he promises to do something, which he then fails to do. Although it does lead to, again, one of my favorite visual jokes, which is so fast. It's something that you can only probably really see in home video because in the conversation, he says, "Oh, we'll go to the place that does the fish." And then we do a fast cut to him going to the telephone directory. He stabs down the page, and really quickly, it's hard to see, but it does say the restaurant's name is the place that does the fish.
Because there are so many gags in this movie. It's unbelievable.
Yes.
And
Yes.
even from the visual bit, when they're in the Winchester the first time and Liz and him are having this talk, and she talks about how what a bad person Ed is, and then says, sorry, Ed, we get a flash over to see the Ed's there. And then they talk about her two
Yes.
best friends and how Ed pisses them off. You flash over to those two, to her two best friends. Fucking brilliant and beautiful. Because you're thinking
Yes.
in a relationship, they're just the two of them here doing this. But it's been going on so long that their friends are obviously going to be there. So they're even able to have fights in front of these people.
Right. And it is it goes all the way back to that very first scene in Spaced where like the editing is the source of the humor. Where they take a perfectly normal conversation, but how it's edited ends up making it funny. And so my mind immediately went back to that scene of like if we saw five people sitting around a table, it wouldn't be nearly as funny as the way it's framed, but nothing in the way that it's framed indicates that they're not aware there are five people there. It's only us of the audience that aren't in on it. So we cut over to see, like I said, Ed and two roommates, and it's just like, oh my god, that's hilarious. Such a good Edgar Wright move.
And funnily enough, this is also on a beat that comes from the real life of Frost and Peg, because they had this pub that they would go to all the time, and Wright was always trying to get them to leave the pub and go somewhere else. So this is a direct correlation to their lives. So
Uh,
essentially, Wright was Liz saying, let's go somewhere else. Let's do something else. Come on. Nope.
right. And it's funny because like when I was trying to think of a quote, usually I have either I don't know the show, and so I just kinda Google big quotes, or I have a pretty iconic quote in mind. Um, with this one, because again, there's so many catchphrases in this film, they all kind of become a bit meaningless. Like, "You have a bit of red on you." My
Oh,
favorite is
beautiful.
Ed yelling at Pete, next time I see him, he's dead," which literally happens, you know? Um, but, my obviously, I chose a different one, which I'll get into that scene when we get there, but, again, what I love is that in this scene, these phrases don't feel like catchphrases yet. They feel like very natural conversation. Well, not very natural, it's comedy conversation, but, they don't stand out as being catchphrases, and then over time, these sentences get repurposed in increasingly implausible scenarios, but they still completely work. So it's a nice way of kind of showing the escalation of stakes through dialogue, which is something I don't see very often.
Yeah. Still to this day, it's incredible. Although I found myself now
Mhm.
saying a lot again, fuck a doodle do, because it is so
Yeah,
fucking funny.
right.
Ah,
And even like fried gold, it's like it's never explained. The phrase is never explained, but it sounds like the kind of inside joke that two friends have, you know?
yeah. And Oh, the pivotal plot point about the Winchester and the gun over the bar that is
Yes.
dropped here like it's nothing, and it's talking about he's connected, he's not connected, is the type of conversations friends would have that you'd think is totally irrelevant and they're wasting our time. And it's not going to be.
It's also literally Chekhov's gun. It's just the other thing I find funny. Because
Uh,
Chekhov had conceived like if a gun hangs over a mantelpiece in Act One, it has to be fired by Act Three, and that literally happens.
and if memory serves, I think that's a Winchester 1866.
Ooh, very good. I wouldn't know that.
Well, it's because I'm in an Old West book, so I got like a lot of random gun knowledge still stuck in my head.
Fair enough.
Otherwise, I could tell you about like army guns and stuff, but that's not nearly as much fun. You've already
Anything else
taken
about
my
the first
gag
chunk of
about like a
film?
bit. You took my gag about a bit of the red on you, which I loved. Um,
Yes.
nah, I think we can go on.
Okay. The following day, a zombie apocalypse has overwhelmed London. Sean and Ed do not notice until they encounter two zombies in their garden, which is the backyard.
Sorry.
Uh, okay.
One thing I do want to go back. So after Liz breaks up with Sean, Sean doesn't go to his mother's who he bought the flowers for. He tries to give to Liz. That was like didn't happen. When they're at the pub and they show up, that great scene of Sean seeing someone necking. They go in for hours and then they come back out
Mhm.
and those people are still necking. And when they turn away, the other visual beat is that the head pops off because it's been a zombie that whole time.
Yes.
Like
Yes. That is a good one.
that was brilliant. I just want to point that out from how awesome that was.
Right. Right. And again,
That,
like you said, it sets up a visual thing of like you're going to see something and then you're going to see that thing again through the lens of a zombie apocalypse. That's a nice little way of kind of setting up that expectation. Wonderful. Anyways, they see two zombies in the garden who they beat to death after throwing household implements and Sean's record collection at them. They devise a plan to rescue Sean's mother, Barbara, and Liz, and then wait out the crisis at the Winchester. So that's everything from they realize the zombie apocalypse to them making the plan, which is where I pulled the quote from because that is the scene that I still remember to this day of them making the plan, then refining it because it sounds so much like two-player characters talking to me.
it is, and it's beautiful that they like run through it each time. And it's the fact that when his mother calls, that's when they do like one of the final edits for the plan.
Right.
Mm.
Yes, exactly. Um, so the scene with the zombies, um, this is another bit of comedy because they're being directly confronted with the zombie apocalypse finally. They've been ignoring it. And even then, they still don't quite believe it, which the protagonists don't believe the evidence of their eyes uh, trope is something that's always kind of bothered me. It implies the characters are stupid. Uh, I like it in here because the entire front half of the film has spent a lot of time establishing these men are not paying attention to the world around them right now. So having them directly confronted by that and still not quite getting it is a natural consequence of that 20-minute interlude rather than a trope used to kind of artificially create suspense.
Yeah, and it also shows the sheer amount of dumb luck in the universe, though, that they have gone
Yes.
unscathed up to this point with everything going on around them.
Right. Yes. The kind of fools are protected by fate thing, which for comedy makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Um. Hmm. Well, then I just got a note for a game thing I want to write later. Now, thanks. That's all.
Hooray. Uh, One thing I also, well, actually, the record collection gag I love because it's a very much a time capsule moment, right? Because like there was definitely that. Well, I mean, I think it's probably still true now that vinyl's come back, but that moment of young men who have aspirations of being a DJ, so they have the vinyl, and then and Sean, no, you can't throw that. You can, and then sitting there having the time to debate which records to throw because zombies move so slow is not only a joke about those two characters and how they don't understand completely the situation they're in, but also a gag about how slow zombies move in zombie films. So it's actually working at two levels, which is great.
Okay. Now that you've said that, the universal new debate, Eddie, do you like original idea of slow moving zombies, or do you like this remake of super fast moving zombies?
I've always been a slow zombie fan whenever I've had an opinion on it, um, because I feel like the inevitable dread works better with a slow moving zombie than a fast moving zombie. But I understand why, as pacing of movies and television have picked up, why the attraction of fast moving zombies for certain kinds of horror films are appealing.
I am also a fan of slow moving zombies, and I do not understand the appeal or the logic of a fast moving zombie. Especially if one of the things that you have is zombies continue to decay, it makes less and less sense.
Right. But I understand it's like dogs can't going upstairs, right? It's oh, they can't go upstairs. So how much of a threat can they be? And so you have to either recontextualize that or you have to address that. So dogs floating has become that the staple, and so that's no longer really a joke. But I think what happened was people looked at slow movie zombies and go, "Oh, that's not scary enough," and it's like, well, then you're not using slow moving zombies correctly. And
Mhm.
weirdly, Shaun of the Dead, even though it's making fun of zombie films, does do it correctly. Uh, which we'll get into when we get further in. You don't really see it here. Right now, it's still a bit of a joke. It's like they're taking for ages to walk across this extremely tiny garden to get to them.
When it goes back into actual zombie movies, how they're easier to combat because they're slower in small numbers. That's why as the
Right.
crowds get
It's
larger and
large groups.
larger, they become massive waves of them that it doesn't matter if you can kill 5 or 100 of them. There's so many, they're going to overwhelm you regardless of where you go. And the other horror part is they could be in any building you go into. Like that's the whole point of it. It doesn't matter if they're slow, if they sort of, what is it, like Michael Myers you, and they're already there when you show up.
Right. Yeah. Their ubiquity is what makes them terrifying. The idea is that throughout the course of the movie, you have isolated moments of zombies, so you can kind of approach them, but then over time, realizing that you are one of the few people who are not this.
Yep.
Which is why there's an interesting uh, field of debate that argues that the original Dawn of the Dead was originally a criticism of communism, because the idea that it was slow and entrenching ideology that slowly
Nah.
consumes people and eventually destroys those who stand against it. And I'm just like, I think it's a bit of a
Eh.
stretch, but I can see the structural logic of these start off as the other, and then eventually they become the norm, and you were the other, and that horror is an interesting approach.
Hmm. I don't know. I don't see that, but now I kind of want to read up on that, and have a debate with someone.
Right.
I would almost see it
But
more as modern day republicanism, how it's just evil and all encroaching.
well, I think that's more the point, is that it's a metaphor for any ideology you don't agree with, right? So at the time, it would have been communism.
I know. I just want to drag Republicans now. That's all.
I I'm always here for that.
I'm sorry.
Uh,
I said Republicans. I should apologize. I meant MAGA hat wearing people because Republicans are just corrupt. MAGA hat wearing people are evil. There's a small difference, not much of one, like a
right.
minuscule laser line worth of difference, like the laser that Blofeld was putting towards James Bond's crotch is a matter of difference. I made a dick joke about MAGA people for multiple reasons. There you go, Eddie.
And
Please
a
go on.
Goldfinger reference. It wasn't Blofeld. It was Goldfinger. It was all right, Goldfinger.
Thank
And to be
you.
fair,
It's
I
up
only know
early.
that 'cause I just watched the movie like 2 months ago. So
Well, I was also up 2 hours earlier than normal today, and we record early in the morning, so people can imagine how early I've been up.
right, right.
The fact I was able
Uh,
to make a dick joke about MAGA people without calling it out until I called it out alone should give me kudos.
yes. Um. So the other thing I like is this is also a movie where the part of the movie where it starts to pivot from the way that we're experiencing the film as sources of humor to the way we experience the film as sources of horror. Before and later in the film, it'll start to play with that more. But right now, like as I mentioned before, the editing being a source of humor of like the way the film is cut gives you more information. It's surprising and hilarious. uh, when Sean and Ed are kind of traumatized, they're trying to find information on TV, and they're flipping through the channels. I didn't notice this the first time I watched it, but someone I stumbled across it online, so I paid for attention for it this time. If you listen to the audio of all the different channels they flip through, the audio itself tells you the story of what's happening. Every time they cut, the next channel they switch to, the sentence they cut into actually does follow on from the previous sentence. And so it's editing as a way of exposition, but for attention deprived mid 20s, late 20s men,
Yeah.
which is
And
fascinating.
there's also the plot beat of how they never locked the door that was established earlier. That's still true here.
Yes.
There are so many small details that this movie is utterly rewatchable multiple times, which is why I don't love the genre, but I really love this movie.
Right. Yes. Um, the idea is that even if you don't like zombie films, you are aware enough of the tropes to understand the things that are being poked at here. But again, like you said, like the door being left open, rule of three, right? It's the first time it gets mentioned, and it's a little bit funny by Pete. The second time he's furious, and so the door being open, and so it's funny because of his outsized reaction to it. And so the third time it comes up, it feels like it should be a bigger laugh, but instead it is the oh shit, the door's been left open, and then a zombie immediately walks in. So like your instinct is to laugh, but it's not funny. And that's a lot of what's happening at this phase of the movie of like movies and training you to laugh at these moments, but then it's not giving you opportunity. Nothing about it is actually inherently funny. It's just funny because we have been trained to know how comedy works, and then it's just not comedy beats, it's horror beats, which this movie helped me to realize how close comedy and horror really are structurally.
Absolutely. And one of the great points about it also is that if someone is not a fan of horror, there is so much humor that the horror is constantly undercut. So you get small spikes of it as you go throughout it, making it more engaging for a larger audience. And you
Right.
still don't lose the horror fans because all the horror beats are still there and you get spikes of it. Beautiful.
Yeah, and it's like this is a violent movie. You know, it's not excessively gory, but people get the shit beat out of them. There are heads falling off. You know, there's a lot of body horror that happens, but because of the comedy, it never feels like it's excessively gory. It's so weird.
They beat two people, mind you, they're already zombies, to death in the backyard with like a bat, essentially. And
Yeah,
there's splashes of red to go with the red that's already on him.
to the
Oh,
tune of "Don't Stop Me Now."
well,
Oh,
if
that's
I
later.
remember
That's
right,
later.
yeah.
But still, I mean,
Oh,
yeah, they again, it's funny because like they beat him and beat him and beat him and beat him and beat him, and then they stop, and they go back to beating them. So like it's this horrifically violent moments that a helps that we actually see the violence. It's all the blows are landing at the bottom of the screen, so we can't see the actual impacts. But b the way it's paced is extremely funny.
and it goes back to the essential double tap. Never just like do it once because they're going to get back up. You make sure that you've killed whoever it is before you move on. Bothers me about so many movies, so many things. Ah, nah.
And I know we're talking about this chunk a lot, but it's a really great moment of the movie. I don't think it's as much attention as it deserves because Sean and Ed are terrified here, right? They're not yet making wisecracks about killing zombies. They're scared. They're and a lot of the things, the problems they run into in this chunk of the movie are of their own creation. Yes, they're joking about records, but it's very clear that is a way to kind of sublimate the terror they're feeling because, like, when they're beating on these zombies, the looks on their faces are like they're just so scared they're gonna keep hitting until long past it's necessary. But because of the way it's paced, it's funny. So
Yeah.
it's how they walk right that line and constantly play with it is continues to be fantastic.
And so one of the things I really do like about this movie, how you just commented on, is they were using humor to keep themselves from being terrified. Much the same way as in Alien, Sigourney Weaver like sings "Twinkle Twinkle Star" to soothe herself. So it's good to see that humans innately do things to comfort themselves when they're uncomfortable, which is not something you see in a lot of films, but it humanizes your characters. So then if something does happen to them, you care even more because you're more in sync with them.
Right.
Oh,
And so even though Sean and Ed are not good people at the start of the movie, because they are friends and understand each other, that bond is what we're attracted to. And we start to see them change as characters. Uh, anyway, do you want to go to the next part of the plan?
yeah.
One gag I forgot to mention is that it's Pete that's actually walking through the open door. That's the other part of the gag. Is that the guy who's bitching about the door is the one that actually comes through the door. But they escape from him, who's now a zombie, by stealing his car.
In
They go to
case
pick up Philip. I'm
we
sorry?
didn't mention it, in case anyone's curious, Pete is also played by the actor who is Sean's antagonist in Spaced.
Yes. Right. Yes. So he plays the boyfriend that he's hating, and so now he's playing the roommate in a roughly similar role, which again, very punchable face. Um, they pick up Philip, who's been bitten, and Barbara, which is Sean's mother. Ed deliberately crashes Pete's car so he can drive Philip's Jaguar instead. They fetch Liz and his flatmates David and Diane, which do not fit in the much smaller Jaguar they have acquired. Philip reconciles with Sean before becoming a zombie.
You don't know
So,
that Ed crashed that car. He could have been trying to move it into a better spot. Anything could have happened.
which again is a force of humor. It's like Ed's like, "Oh, yeah, I'll be right here." Go inside, have a conversation in the house, come back out, and the car is crashed. He's like, "I don't know what happened." And it's like, "You know."
That is also an incredible player character move for anyone that's at a game.
Yes, yes. We need to get the better car, so let's just get rid of this car. And you can almost see the player sliding notes to the game master while the other player is having the scene in the house, right?
Oh God.
But again, that's so now we're at the part of the movie where they have realized the dangers they're in, but they are still trapped in their relatively minor political problems, right? So like, or personal problems, I should say. It's like the TV is explicitly saying, "Stay home," and they're like, "Nope, we should go to the Winchester. I got to go rescue my mom. I hate my stepdad, and Ed is obsessed with Philip's car." And so they're still kind of in this mode of like they haven't quite transitioned yet, but they're starting to.
I just have one thing to say to you, Eddie.
What?
Harriet Jones, MP. She was
Yes, yes.
brilliant. I loved seeing her. It made me think of Doctor Who. And I was Doctor Who out yet? I want to say yes. Doctor
No,
Who had already come out.
no. This is 2004. Doctor Who starts 2005. So
That's right. That was 2007. Ah,
yeah,
love it.
and it's funny you mention that because without overthinking this too much, you can start to see a little bit of that early Russell T Davies vibe in this movie. It's very different in a lot of ways, but it's the same kind of let's take an established formula, add humor to that, and use that to heighten the drama. That approach is still largely in play in this movie.
Yeah.
Um, I think when I remember when this initially was being shown in the U.S., it was more heavily marketed as a comedy because I don't think it was hard. It's hard to classify this film today, honestly. Like I said, I mean, it's not quite a parody. So it was kind of the trailers and whatnot were cut in a way that looked much like a comedy, and then you watch it and say, "Oh, this is really violent," you know. It's interesting to kind of see that again, that moment of using humor as an approach to a different genre as opposed to being a genre in its own right, which arguably means that comedy as its own genre is now gone, but that's a whole nother debate.
I stand by it's a zom-com. It is not a love story. It's not even really like a maturity film about Sean becoming someone who's more mature, because that's like undercut by the end of the film. So yeah, it's mm,
Right.
um, is Philip the most well known and established actor of this entire film,
I think so.
which is
Uh,
probably why he's in it for 5 minutes.
right. It's the okay. Well, we've got £4 million. I can only give you 100,000 pounds. Cool. Then I'll do 1 day of shooting. Okay. Let's get all your scenes in.
I'm just
Um,
curious if he was like a fan of Spaced, and they said, "Would you do us a favor and come on?" It's like, I got a couple hours.
maybe, yeah. I will say, um, Sean, since Philip conveniently dies here, m- Sean's relationship with Philip as stepfather definitely resonated with my own relationship with my stepfather, with the exception of I did not reconcile with my stepfather. He was an asshole. He died. Don't really care. Uh, did not stop me from having extremely complicated feelings after he had died. So, Sean having his own complicated feelings after this felt very true to me. And this is the point when I first saw the movie, I was like, holy shit, Simon Pegg can act, right?
Yeah,
Because up to now, he's being funny, quirky, kind of nerdy, everyman. And then his scene with Sean and the immediate aftermath, you can see how much that hit him on his face. Even though some of his dialogue is talking about it, some of it's not, though. A lot of it is in how Sean Pegg is presenting himself. And it's a great moment because all of the other characters are still acting the same way they had before. But now, because of him realizing that Philip is dead, the fact we have this moment where Sean realizes now he's in a horror film, but nobody else does entirely. And seeing that collision is just amazing on the screen.
I get that. So
Mhm.
this movie is hard for me really to talk about right now. I'm not going to go into a lot of it, but having buried my own father last week and having not reconciled at all, it's difficult somewhat to talk about this scene specifically. But I agree, Peg's acting is incredible. But I then also like the immediate turn where they get everyone trapped in the car, which undercuts all those feelings and emotions with humor again in a horrific moment, trying to get them out. And Ed's just chilling, watching it all transpire.
Right. That is one thing that I find fascinating about this film is like it's 2 hours long. It does not feel it because you're right. It is so fast paced. Nothing has time to breathe, and I think weirdly it's to the movie's credit that it doesn't because it's constantly shifting gears. Like you said, it's like you have this dramatic moment, and before you can really feel it, we're back to horror. We're back to and it's a slapstick horror because again, like they're fighting him inside this tiny jaguar, and so you're trying to beat up zombie where you're stuck in this extremely small space is also inherently funny.
So I know that we're going to do the Cornetto Trilogy. Part of me wants to actually add on Scott Pilgrim just so we can have another example of Wright's directorialship to see those constant fast cuts and how they tell the story and see if it's told differently with other actors that aren't Peg and Frost, who are so used to working with him and are able to like bring their own acting chops and humor to it.
To be fair, I would be amenable to that because, frankly, we did not start this. At least I didn't start this with that movie in mind, but we keep going back to that as a touchstone because it's one of the more popular examples of Edgar Wright's oeuvre.
Not
I
successful
would be
though.
amenable to doing it. Yeah,
Not at all
yeah.
successful.
Well,
Okay.
it's well known. I should put it that way.
No,
If
no,
not
no, you're
financially,
right.
it's well known.
It's popular, but it wasn't successful.
No, no, it was not. It was not a. Shaun of the Dead made way more money than Scott Pilgrim did. I think.
And I think Scott Pilgrim costs a lot more money. Cool. Let's add that to the list. Look at that, people. Now you're getting how we riff and figure out what we're going to
Right.
do on air.
Right.
And then you'll notice we probably won't even do Scott Pilgrim and go right back into fantasy. But we've decided we're going to do Scott Pilgrim.
um, just a minor note during this chunk is they one of the few points where they kind of lampoon the zombie genre but don't really do anything meaningful with it is the um, with the zombies, and like, don't call them that. Don't use the Z word. Um, it's a note to a lot of zombie films. Don't call them zombies, uh, uh, which is objectively kind of a weird, dumb thing, especially for a self-aware movie like this. So they're playing with that, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And they do in fact use the word zombie later. So it's kind of a meh moment. One of the few missteps I think in here.
Zed's
But
dead, baby. Zed's dead.
Zed's dead, right? My personal favorite though is David, the roommate, went and it's like, so all of you in your car, and David's like, I don't see the point in owning a car in London. And it's like, as someone who lives in London also does not own a car, I'm with him on this. There really isn't much point owning a car.
Have you ever watched Black Books, by the way? This is how I know this actor, and I like him. At least his talent.
No, I don't think I've watched Black Books.
Oh, oh, all right. You need to go watch Black Books. He's a guy that owns a bookstore, and he's a horrible human being, but it is so funny. And it's got God, what's her name now? Tasman, I think's her first name. Ah,
Oh
it'll come
yeah,
to
yeah,
me
that's
later.
familiar.
It'll come to me later when we're off air. But humorous, good stuff.
I'll add that to my list.
And I
Is there
think
anything
it
else?
even has Bilbo from space who shows up in it. I haven't
Right,
seen it in 20 years, but it's like the three of them. Once again,
right.
showing that there's a very small pool of people in each sort of economic level.
Bill Bailey is the person you're thinking of. I just had to look him up.
Yes.
Is there anything else about this chunk of the film?
No, we can move on from here.
Okay. Forced to abandon the car and their weapons, they sneak through the neighborhood and briefly encounter a group led by Sean's friend Yvonne, with each group member resembling a doppelganger of the other group's members.
Wait a
Sean
second.
defends Barb.
You say doppelganger. I say there are similarities between the group, but one group already looks a lot more proficient than the other. I'm not going to say which group that is, but it's definitely not Sean's group. Go ahead.
Right, right. I'll get back to that. I've thought that too. But Sean defends Barbara from a zombie and impales it with a swing ball pole. After imitating zombies to bypass a horde and reach the Winchester, Sean and Ed argue when Ed answers his mobile phone, attracting the zombies' attention. Uh, David panics and breaks a window in the Winchester, forcing Sean to lure the horde away, using himself as bait before returning. So yes, Yvonne's group. Um, Very obviously, the gag is there is a version of the zombie apocalypse where Sean's group could be the efficient, super amazing type in their own action film, and we're following the wrong group. That's kind of the gag here, which is amazing because it's they're again deep in horror film. They've lost their car, they lost their weapons. They're trying to sneak past these gardens, and oh hi, how are you? How's it going? Just having a casual chat because that's what you do when you run into people you know. Um, and then it's super clear that Yvonne's group has their shit together and Sean's group does not. It's amazing.
And the thing is, you could tell that there's a relationship between those two characters that could have been romantic and they've passed it, or maybe not. It's very
Mhm.
much paralleling the space relationship. And as soon as I saw this movie, I thought there's going to be a sequel to this in a year that's like Yvonne of the Dead. I bet. I wanted that movie so bad to see like the action group going through it. Oh,
But I think that's to this film's credit is that Yvonne and this group only show up in this scene, and Yvonne herself only shows up in 3 scenes. So she's not in this movie a whole lot. But you're right that you can almost see that entire film in your head just from the scene, right? You can piece out there because they are in the zombie movie that we are slightly making fun of. But it just happens to be that both these films are happening simultaneously, and we're just only following the one of the fuck ups, which is amazing.
and we get to see her boyfriend, Arthur Dent, or some people likely know him as Watson.
Yes, I was like so random. I'm like, again, people who became super influential or big name actors shortly afterwards. It's like he's just a cameo role in this.
Because at this point, when he's done The Office. Maybe he's done the bomb that was the updated Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Right,
Maybe.
right, yes. So it's just wild. Um, and then the fight
And
with oh good.
do you recognize their version of Ed?
No, who's that?
I want to say that he was the 12th Doctor's robotic bald companion.
Oh right. Yes.
All these Doctor Who actors sprinkled throughout this. Unbelievable.
Right. Well, when you make with a few years exception, 60 years worth of television, eventually you're gonna pretty much get everybody on screen.
Well, how would you feel if you are a successful actor over there, and I say over there because I'm overseas, and you go throughout your entire career and you never once get to be on Doctor Who?
It's true. It's true.
I don't
That
remember
can be
Maggie
awful.
Smith popping up in Doctor Who.
I thought she
R.I.P.
did,
Maggie Smith.
actually. I thought she did.
Really?
Maybe
Who?
I'm wrong.
All right.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Now we're gonna like deviate into Doctor Who. Who was Maggie Smith in Doctor Who, Eddie? No, no googling, just
I
off your brain. You've
no,
read all the
no, I'm just
books.
saying, I
You
thought I
have
saw
that
her.
knowledge.
I
I'm
don't
gonna.
first of all, I've not watched all of Doctor Who, actually.
I bet you
Um,
one quid. I don't even know what a quid is. That Maggie Smith has never been in Doctor Who.
it's a pound. It's not that complicated. No, you're right. She wasn't in Doctor Who. It's my fault.
I will take my now I know pound note.
She was a Carol Burnett show. Didn't know that.
That's it, folks. We've deviated just to live googling now to give you the bio of Maggie Smith.
uh, but anyway,
Sorry, Dame Maggie Smith.
Dame Maggie Smith, yes. God damn it, show respect. But like, so again, like we see the scene of this extreme competent group that walks by, immediately followed by Sean trying to save his mother with a ball on a pole.
Well,
And
he didn't
it's
have anything before. Liz, not
right,
Liz, the other friend threw it to him is the only reason he had a weapon.
right. And then he tries to hit it with the plastic ball. I was like, no, that's rubbish. It's just like, it's so good.
Do, do you know how I know this is not a role playing game?
Why?
Is that the player characters, who for us would be Sean and his group, did not convince the NPCs, Yvonne and her group, to join them to use them
Right,
as cannon fodder to protect their group. That's how I know
right,
it's not a role playing game.
right. Exactly. And this is that actually that scene is one of my touchstones for why I think the ultimate thing is um trying to juxtapose a certain perspective of British culture with American action film tropes, is because it is, as I understand it, asking for help and imposing with somebody when they have something to do is very much not a done thing at a super high reductive cultural level. So that whole "Oh, hey, how's it going? It's just small talk," and then well, I'll let you go, is kind of how it is expected to navigate the situation. Whereas, you're right, it, it would be very easy to go, hey, so why don't we just have a group of 12 people and we'd do so much better? And say, well, no, you've got, I don't want to interrupt. I don't want to cause fuss. So you got it going ahead, which is also exemplified with Barbara, right? Barbara is kind of the edge case of that is the I don't want to make a fuss British mom stereotype.
Now, Eddie, you've pointed out to me that my mannerisms are more British because I'd rather do like a polite chat and then move on, not to inconvenience anyone. Now I just need to move.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
I also think that that's more of the America South culture too, right?
I was unfortunately a Southern gentleman.
Because I've run into that a bit living in the South, at least living in Georgia. So I mean, I think it, but it's again, we're talking highly reductive things here, but
Yeah,
that is
we're
kind
speaking
of a
in broad
certain
stereotypes.
right, but it's not missing from America, but it's missing from American media in general sense, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, and then of course the Winchester scene where we
What
see David is
before
a
you go
jerk.
on, as
Oh
it's
yeah,
important. I think this happens here. I can't remember now. Sean using a trampoline to jump the fence.
yes.
Like his
Oh
bet
right, yes.
the only action piece from Sean we get in this entire film, and it's to save his mom.
Right. No, it's good because that's going to be relevant next episode, actually, if I
Yeah.
remember. Right. So, then they go into the Winchester, which is
Oh, since we're still on the mom, there's something else I remembered now that's like a direct riff, like how I keep stopping you from the Winchester. Um, is that we get a direct play on when they say, Barbara, we're coming to get you, back directly to The Walking Dead, where, not The Walking Dead, fucking A. Um, they,
Dawn of the Dead.
Romero's movie, because that's what
Right.
they say is like, Barbara, we're coming to get you, in a scary Hari Zombie way, compared to Sean's, Barbara, we're coming to get you.
I actually
That's,
did not know that. That's actually really good. I mean, there are
I
definitely
like, I don't know.
explicit homages to Romero's films. I know that, but I didn't realize that was one of them.
I don't know why I've seen all these movies. I don't like the genre, but I've seen them all.
Right. Is
That's
it okay
it.
to go to the Winchester now?
You can go. We can go to the pub.
Okay. All right. I'll actually do the summary because, yeah, they get to the Winchester, but the inside the Winchester is more interesting. Um, as the group takes refuge inside the Winchester, Sean discovers that the zombies followed him, and Ed inadvertently tracks them by playing on the pub's slot machine. While fighting the pub's zombified owner, Sean discovers the Winchester rifle above the bar is functional, which he had previously debated with Ed. Barbara reveals she was bitten and dies after giving Sean and Liz's relationship her approval. David attempts to shoot Barbara, but Sean stops him, accusing David of hating him and being in love with Liz. David denies this, but Diane admits she knows it's true. Barbara becomes a zombie, forcing a distraught Sean to shoot her. And before, when the movie was kind of oscillating back and forth between horror and comedy, this scene just says there are no limits. It's all the same thing. We're going to rapidly shift gears between drama, horror, and comedy throughout this whole scene, and not even stop. It's wild.
Yeah. So you missed one important beat, though.
What did I miss?
Unless it's, nope. Sorry, that's future. That's the next bit. I'm not gonna say it.
Okay, but like, uh, we're going from the gag of the Winchester being operational, which pays off the fights that Ed and Sean were having about whether it was operational. We talked about that. To where the pub owner comes in, and during the fight, the jukebox goes off. This is what I mentioned before. Starts playing "Don't Stop Me Now," and so the entire fight scene, as well as Sean or David trying to get the lights to work, is all synced to "Don't Stop Me Now" by Queen.
Oh, one of the best Queen songs ever. It
Yes,
is. As a Queen fan, it's one of my favorite songs by them.
right. It's the lyrics are very obviously relevant to the scene. It's a banger of a song. It's paced well with the action, and then within minutes after that, Sean is shooting his own mother. It's like, what the fuck is this movie?
The confrontation, though, between David and Sean about it when David was going to shoot her is interesting and intense, because it talks about what it takes to actually be the hero that Sean has been pretending to be all this time. And how when
Right.
crunch time came, he essentially failed, because it wasn't until after the mother completely transformed, was about to attack them, that he did anything.
Right.
Which part of you can
What's
understand that, but the other part is David, asshole that needs to be out of the movie, has one point that is made right then.
right. And that's what's interesting about this whole movie is that um aside from the zombies and aside from I was gonna say aside from minor characters, that's not even true. Most every character is neither explicitly entirely correct and good, nor are they completely villainous. Uh, uh, and so what kind of happens is that Sean is obviously our viewpoint character. Right? It's literally in the title of the movie. Sean is the character we're seeing all this stuff through. So Sean sees all of this cast of characters as just jerks and people who his girlfriend's kind of a shrew, and David's a jerk, and Ed's kind of a moron, and his roommate's awful, and his mom's a little bit oblivious, and his stepdad's a jerk. And then throughout the course of the movie, we see that all of them have valid points about Sean that he has been ignoring or avoiding. And as the tension of the zombie apocalypse ramps up, their viewpoints start to poke through Sean's denial. And so David ultimately just cares about Liz. And so they both have a connectivity. They both care about Liz, but obviously from very different standpoints. And a lot of things that David's saying are framed in the worst possible way, and he makes some very bad decisions, but so is everybody else in the movie. But right near the end, he brings up a good point and then is almost immediately killed by zombies.
And but then you have to think about how sad Diane's life is because she's known this all this time and she's stayed with him.
Mhm.
Like that is a tragic story in of itself, hidden behind all the horror and the humor. Like that's existence that she chose to have.
Right. And again, it all pays off to when he goes to Liz's apartment the first time before the apocalypse is recognized, and Sean, being petty, makes a snide comment of, "Why don't you just date Liz then?" And David just gets silent. And the first time, I just, he's being kind of a jerk. I didn't pay attention because I knew the twist. I watched, and Diane's face when Sean says that, for a brief moment, you can see that she knows that's true. So there's a really good balance of the actors, because obviously they know where their arcs are going, are putting in small bits of their performance at the beginning so that you can build them at the end, which is great. Again, like Ed, um, wanting to be someone important, but he only finds video games as that outlet to his eventual resolution we'll get to in a minute. So all those things are playing off each other. And again, like it's the David does not get redeemed. He's still generally an antagonist for a good chunk of the film,
A horrible
but
character.
he's not completely antagonistic. He has, again, valid points. And so when he's actually killed, we do have a small amount of care for him, primarily because Diane cares about him.
Um, I would pushing into that because this is a point I was going to make before, but since you mentioned he gets killed by zombies, I'll make it now. Is that he shot Sean? The only reason Sean isn't dead is because the gun misfired. Like that is what David did. So you can't really. I personally don't really can't feel affection for a character who, during an argument, would have chosen violence to kill the person that is up to this point more or less got them to a relatively safe-ish place because of his feelings for Liz, which then has a discussion whether or not Liz was aware of David's feelings, which in my opinion she wasn't. So she was oblivious to have her parallel Sean by walking through life without noticing other things around her. Because we don't spend enough time with Liz to really see the parts of her life that she ignores. She's focused on Sean.
I I think we're agreeing more than disagreeing in the sense of I'm not saying that he gets redeemed as a character. Maybe what I'm saying more is that he gets redeemed as a symbol. Because, well, we're not quite there yet. David getting killed, we're actually not quite there yet. So I'll say my rebuttal for that. Um, I bring it up because we're in the midst of the argument with David, and his points about you need to shoot your mom because she is a zombie are correct. But also because of how he has been framed up to this point, nobody, including the audience, wants to hear that. So we sympathize with Sean because she has been the only nice character throughout this whole movie. And so it's like, you don't want to shoot the nice mom. It's only until Sean's hand is completely forced that he actually takes the action. So it's
But
it's it's a, it's a complicated emotional moment.
agreed. But it also then endangers everyone up to this point he said that he was trying to protect. So it goes back
Sure, no, absolutely.
to initial search about failing as the hero of the film, which will
David
be
is
reinforced
David is right,
if we ever see Pete again.
right, right. Um, uh, uh, David is utterly selfish. The only time he's not selfish is about Liz, but he is still selfish because he wants to possess Liz. He does not want to have a relationship with Liz.
Yeah. Do you want to move on since we're essentially like
Yeah,
knocking on this door, like da, da, da,
right.
da,
So
da, da, da,
let's
da,
just
da.
finish this part up. Okay. So
Zombies at the window.
uh, zombies break through a window of the pub and pull David out, eating him alive. In a foolish attempt to save the doomed David, Diane opens the doors to the pub and rushes into the horde of zombies, using David's severed leg as a weapon. With the doors now open, zombies pour into the bar. The mummified Pete reappears in the horde and is shot by Sean after biting Ed. Sean, Liz, and Ed take cover behind the bar. Sean sets the bar on fire with alcohol to serve as a barrier. The three take refuge in the cellar where they realize they only have 2 shells left. Sean and Liz contemplate suicide while Ed volunteers to be killed by the zombies. Upon discovering a small lift for kegs that opens onto the street, Sean and Liz exit the pub while Ed buys them a time by staying behind with the rifle. Yvonne arrives with the British Army, who gun down the zombies before taking Sean and Liz to safety. So yes, uh, David's for me, um, David, you're right, was not a good character, but because Diane cared about him, and we see it feels like it's very brief when you first watch the movie, but when I watch it again, how she cares about David is pretty clear subliminally throughout a large runtime of the film. So seeing her reaction makes you care about how it impacted her, not about him specifically, right?
I can understand her perspective, but so the fact that David was going to go outside anyway willingly, his death undercut for being an asshole because he knows what he did was like irredeemable, is you could call it justice, but whatever. It resolves that issue. The fact that Diane, who you felt some sort of pity for at this point, chooses to go and open the door to death so everyone dies, undercuts a lot of those feelings for her because they're if these are your friends, there should be a sense of community and you're trying to protect them. Even if something tragic
Right.
happens, you keep that protection going. You don't open the door so everyone dies because the person that you cared about died.
Right. Which sets up the final kind of shift of this movie is that we start off with everyone's a jerk and Sean is kind of selfish and not seeing these people for who they are. The middle half of the movie is him starting to shift his expectations on who these people actually are and coming to a new understanding relationship with them. And now we're moving to the final half of the movie where Sean was largely right, but for the wrong reasons. He did not like Liz's roommates, and here they prove that they are not people worth liking. They have their own complicated interiority that we were not previously aware of. But you're right; it doesn't invalidate the fact that they are making bad mistakes that endanger everybody else because they're not the kinds of people you should be saving. Sean did not want to save them initially; he was forced into saving them. And now Sean's initial instinct is proven correct. But again, originally he wanted for selfish reasons, now for objectively valid reasons.
Which utter agreement. And it also shows though that people who will stand up and do the right thing in crisis moments aren't always people you expect to. Which, for instance, we get that with Ed here. Like Ed, who is a total slacker, who everybody dislikes at the last, is willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good.
Right. Um, I do want to talk about Ed, but just a brief side note is like I also do appreciate the fact that as this complicated situation is happening, David's death is utterly hilarious. It gets ripped apart, and like I cannot reiterate, Diane tries to beat off zombies with the guy she pines after severed leg. It is horrifying and funny at the same moment.
Utterly
But
ridiculous.
you're right. Like at this point, you start to realize that Ed is abrasive. Ed um, says things that make other people uncomfortable, but also on a purely statistical level, Ed's decisions have been more right than wrong. He is a good driver. He got them out of a number of situations through his driving skill. Yes, he wrecked one car allegedly unintentionally. But point is, he made sure there's another car available. And going to the Jaguar turned out to be a good move because the speed was necessary at a certain point in the film. Ed's video game skills lend him to a better understanding of weapons. That's not how video games at all work, but in this kind of movie, that is how it works. Uh, yes, he did set the jukebox off, but that gave them the access to the weapons and ultimately to their escape. So, and a lot of his opinions of the people around Sean were generally correct. He likes Barbara. He thinks Liz is bad for him, and he thinks that Liz's uh, roommates are annoying.
Yeah. And if you look at Spaced, the character there was similar to Ed because a lot of the things he does for Peg's characters. And some of the same emotional beats, like you don't get back to your ex because he's bad for you, are still
Mm,
paralleled from there.
right. Yeah, and that's a good point because you're right. I forgot to mention this, but the way Ed explains it is not Liz is bad. He explains that Liz is bad for you, which is true. Liz is a complicated character through relatively complicated character for this. But he never's like Liz is a bad person. It's your relationship with Liz is bad.
Yeah. Her friends are bad, but she is
Right.
bad for you. It's very clear distinction that's almost played there.
Right. Um, and then like we have the scene in the basement where they're having a very frank conversation about killing themselves. And Ed is 100% playing up American action movie stereotypes. I keep saying American, but action movie stereotypes.
You keep saying
Um,
action movies. Like, this is not an action movie, my friend.
no, but that's not how Ed sees this, right? Ed is seeing this as an action film.
I would push against that too. It's not even that he's seeing it as an.
Did you see how he drove that Jaguar?
That's not an action film. They do that in like all sorts of films. If that is your only touchstone for an action film, I think we're gonna have some serious discussions whenever we get to Hot Fuzz. Like Hot Fuzz is an
Okay.
action film and the riff on the genre.
Okay, then let me recontextualize. Ed thinks he's in a video game.
Yes, I give you that.
A lot of video games do draw from action film tropes. So, but
They draw
I
from.
agree with you that there's not enough of them in this movie to justify that. So I'll take that part back. But
Thank you.
I will stand by the fact that Ed thinks he's in a video game. He thinks he's in a driving game. He thinks he's in a shooting game. He thinks it's a zombie game.
100% agree because Space, the
Mm,
reference I got from it was playing Resident Evil, like Resident Evil 2 is
right.
why we got this entire film, which is a video game. So, utterly agree. I let the action thing go for the first couple, but it's not an action thing. It's a video game thing.
Fair enough. Fair enough. No, it's good pushback. I accept that. But the point is that Ed is not quite in the same reality as everybody else in the movie.
Well,
But
he's been like puffing drugs on the side. Of course, he's not in the same reality.
right, exactly. It's not. It's set up in a certain way, but the point is that his reality turns out to be the best one to have followed because his instincts were ultimately correct. He makes some mistakes, obviously, but everyone in the movie does. And again, there's this very dramatic thing of them trying to figure out who's going to how they're going to kill themselves with two shots and whatnot, and the jokes about like maybe if they lined up. Um, to kind of go, oh wait, there's a lift here. We can just go.
It goes to the importance of being able to see your surroundings. Perfect for a horror movie, utterly
Right,
completely.
right, right. Um, and then Yvonne shows up and proves 100% she's objectively a better protagonist.
Yeah. And it's great seeing Jessica Hines, at least in the movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, anything else before we do the epilogue?
We can jump to the epilogue.
Okay. So 6 months later, civilization has returned to normal, but with the added element that the surviving zombies are now used as free labor and entertainment. Liz has moved in with Sean, who now keeps the now zombified Ed chained up in the garden shed, revealing that Ed is still at least somewhat sapient. And the two play video games together in the shed.
I like when you
And
said the non-zombified Ed the Shed. That was pretty funny.
yes, now zombified. Yes. Sorry, I meant non now. Words, whatever.
Well, no, it's just
Um,
funny because that is where I would want to keep Nick Frost if he was my roommate to let him not be in my house so it wouldn't be messy. Just saying.
Stay here, play video games. That's all I need from you. Uh, I'll be honest. The ending is the part of the movie that I'm most conflicted by.
How so?
Uh,
Other than keeping a
on the one
zombie
hand,
in their shed that still almost bites you when you go to play video games.
right? On the one hand, it's the gag of everything is kind of the same, even though it's all changed. So I kind of get that. And Sean basically gets everything he thinks he wants, but all of that is twisted with the explicit exploitation of the dead for not only our consumer purposes, but for our visceral entertainment and as a source of mockery. is deeply weird.
It's weird, but I would say spot on as to what would happen in our very capitalized society.
Right. So it's the all of that feels like exactly like you said. It's the I 100% believe this is a thing that would, of course, there would be game shows featuring zombies. Of course, market capitalists will find a way to use this workforce. None of that is surprising to me. It's just kind of a strange downbeat ending. But again, as I think about it, it does parallel being the movie in the sense that Sean is once again in his bubble, not really paying attention to the horrors happening around him. This kind is the horrors of capitalism rather than the horrors of zombie apocalypse. And he ultimately cares about the fact that his girlfriend's living with him and he still has his best friend, even though his best friend is chained in the shed.
Yeah. And Liz has changed as a person, essentially replacing Ed for Sean. And they just kind of go to the pub every night and do that.
Yeah.
The things that she
Um,
didn't want to do at the start of the movie.
right. Which heavily implies that she's only really doing this because she's scared of the alternative, which, given a post zombie apocalypse, and this is a man who saved her from said apocalypse, is a somewhat valid concern to have, even if it's for a movie that is supposed to be a fun parody of zombie films, it is a very bleak indictment of both humanity and zombie films as a genre. And so it's I don't think it's a bad ending. It just always leaves me conflicted.
Oh, yeah. 100% agree. And the thing is, if you're not thinking about it on that level, it's just kind of funny. Look,
Yeah, yeah,
Sean got the girl, Sean still has his buddy, and people are making the best of their situation. Some
right.
people could call it uplifting. I, on the other hand, look at it as problematic. And it's
Yeah,
my least favorite part of this entire movie.
right. Um, but it's like I also feel like you can't. It is a logical outgrowth for the themes the movie was telling because it's the trope here is that the hero gets the girl and he still has his friends and everything's uplifting, but that's not how these things work. So it's a logical conclusion, but you're right. It's the I kind of wish the movie had ended at the Winchester. They escaped from the Winchester, but that would have undercut the artistic logical of the movie. So it's like again, super conflicted.
I don't know. I think it would have proven that Yvonne was the protagonist if she'd showed up. They killed them. We get Sean and Liz hugging. Cut to
Right,
credits.
right. That would be a different kind of funny.
That'd almost be like Shaft funny, is what that would be.
Right.
In the movie, wait, isn't there like another 5 minutes we need? Nope, that's it. We're out.
Hey, shitty. Ah, click.
Oh god, that's gonna be like a movie touchstone whenever we do this for a long time. For in case anyone's curious, we covered Shaft on the Patreon because I
Yes.
chose the movies to watch. Um,
Right.
yeah,
Any final
I'm
thoughts?
torn. I'm torn because I still don't like zombie movies. I've seen a whole bunch of them. I've watched The Walking Dead for like 2, 3 seasons before I stopped. I am glad this movie exists because it propelled the rest of the trilogy that's going to happen. I'm going to say that another one of the trilogy is my favorite film, but it also put all three of them in a solid place to keep doing more and more work, which I like.
Right. I if you can't tell, I really like Shaun of the Dead. Uh, obviously, like any of these things, I have quibbles because no art is perfect. Arguably, art should not be perfect. Um, I really enjoy this. It's not a kind of movie where like I watch it constantly, but it's every time I have an excuse to watch it, I watch it and I enjoy it. I recognize the references, and this time watching it from a purely critical standpoint, I got even more out of it. Uh, and I think it shows that you don't have to be a fan of a genre to appreciate what is trying to do, as long as you understand the genre. Superhero movies are the same way. Even though we're fans of superhero movies, we can still tell a good from a bad superhero movie. I think people who aren't fans of superhero movies can also deduce that. I don't think they need
Hmm,
to be heavily comic book readers to necessarily get into that. I mean, I'm talking in
you give
largely
him a
in
lot
the
of credit.
abstract. I try to. I try to be optimistic about these things.
I'm the
Uh,
more, I guess, pragmatic one of us.
Fair enough. But suffice to say, more to my point, like this is a good film, and I like this film, frankly, in spite of it being a zombie film, because ultimately, this is a good movie that happens to be making fun of zombie tropes, not a movie entirely based around making fun of zombie tropes. If it was just that, I probably would like this a lot less because it's like I don't really like the films you're making fun of, and I'm making fun of a thing that I don't really like anyway. So, meh. This is the no. We're going to actually tell it an entirely different film and use this as the structure and find the comedy in the juxtaposition of these two wildly different genres, which again goes back to Spaced, right?
Yeah.
From that perspective, I really enjoyed it, and so I ended up actually appreciating the zombie parts more because the fact is that they were the creative conflict between these two very different styles of film.
Nice. This is
So
the third time I've ever watched this movie, and
I think it's the
potentially the last.
fifth
It
or sixth,
it is a good movie, but I've already given my opinions on zombie stuff, so
right?
it's probably
Right.
not something I'll watch again.
Well, then what will you watch again, Chris? What are we gonna talk about next week?
Good thing you added that extra bit because I was going to go somewhere totally different. Next time you can probably, unless we get another Wild Hair, expect Hot Fuzz Part 2 of the trilogy that was not really meant to be a trilogy but became a trilogy.
Indeed. So with that, we will talk to you next week about police films.